This is Words Aptly Spoken, which comes from Proverbs 25:11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. The written word is a precious treasure. We want to preserve written knowledge for God's glory and as an anchor to the history of the church and its classical conversations. We hope to encourage the reading of words and of the word. Welcome to Words Aptly Spoken, where Jennifer Courtney, Timothy Knotts, and I discuss books from the Classical Conversations curated curriculum. Today is Wednesday, December 18th, 2024. I'm Lee Bortons, and Merry Christmas, everybody. Today, we're going to have with us Brittany Lewis, our Reasoning Strand owner for Classical Conversations Multimedia, which means she's basically in charge of making sure all the materials are top quality, and she's a perfect person for that job. She's been with us a long time, and so we always are happy to have her on. Tim, you're in charge since Jennifer's on vacation, and so why don't you tell us what about this month's shows?
Yeah, so this is our last show of the year, which is sad and exciting. Glad to have had so many great chances to enjoy good conversations around our books this year. We're wrapping up our year with the last of our cultivating Christian resource cultivating Christian leaders resources. That's a mouthful. The last of them for the year. We've been in that theme for the last 3 months, and we're doing Doug Wilson's Angels in the Architecture today. Also, great news, the 2025 calendar is up and available on Lee's website. So, Lee, you want to share some more information about that with us?
Yeah, so I'm just really thankful for classicalconversationsbooks.com that allows us to afford this podcast. They're our one and only sponsor at this time. And what we do is at my website, leebortons.com. Our producer Emma here is really good about keeping the calendar up to date. There's also the archives from the last 2 years. So if you want to know what books we've talked about in the past, you can go to YouTube where they're all stored at this point. And my channel is called at Lee Bortons. And so I really hope that you take the time over this holiday to maybe reinvigorate your desire to be lifelong learners and leading your children and watch some of our podcasts. Maybe you could have some friends over and read a book together, have a mini book club or something. So thank you for being here, you two.
Always glad to.
Pleasure.
All right, Lee. Well, first question is always the same. Usually Jennifer asks it, but today I get to. Why do we recommend Angels in the Architecture for our Christian leaders?
Yeah, it was one of the very first books that I read that made me realize that maybe the time period I lived in didn't have the answers to everything. And in reading Douglas Wilson's questions about how did medieval Christianity differ from our time period was super intriguing to me because I knew nobody that spoke about these issues. And one of the reasons I enjoyed the book so much is it's very much in layman's terms. It's not like reading quantum physics or how to repair a car. It's very pleasant and easy to read language. And yet I kept meeting people and time periods and places I'd never heard of before. And so the book was very approachable and yet challenged me to know I didn't know as much as I thought I did. So I just, in rereading it to get prepared for today, I found that, gosh, it's probably almost 30 years old, the book. I'm sure you'll tell us more, but it hasn't lost any of its flavor because it's centered around big questions and how you might possibly answer them. So I just thought it was a good resource for parents who found themselves in my position where we didn't even know what the big questions of theology were.
Yeah, I love that it tries to shine a light on what has been otherwise called the Dark Ages, and to help show us that that picture that's been shown to us of that era might not be accurate either. So it's not just that we might not have all the answers, but they might have had a lot more answers than they've been given credit for in that era. So Brittany, this book's title makes it sound like it's some kind of a treatise on statuary in medieval cathedrals, perhaps. Um, but but that's not what it's about. So why do you think that the title of the book is Angels in the Architecture when it's not about buildings? And then maybe you can touch a little on how is architecture a little bit of an analogy for us.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited to talk about this book. This is one of my favorites in our bookstore. And I always love to read parts of it to my Challenge 4 students because there's so many great connections there. And it's one of our resources for Challenge 4 parents too. So, Angels in the Architecture's full title includes a little subtitle, A Protestant Vision for Middle Earth, which makes you pause a bit. Protestant Vision for Middle Earth, especially that the term Middle Earth, which recalls to me stories that I've loved, like Narnia and Lord of the Rings. And there's reason for that since those men loved the Middle Ages too, medieval times. And so I think it refers to the great cathedrals that were erected at this time as Christendom grew. So I was thinking about this today because I was remembering that the reopening of Notre Dame just happened, and we don't have that many buildings in our world like that anymore, especially buildings being built. Our church is going through an expansion right now, and we're not building something like a cathedral, although we have very far reaching um, goals for the church standing for generations to come. Um, those buildings that the medievals often labored for their whole lifetime to build had a very forward looking vision for the church standing and serving great, 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 great grandchildren. And so that's, I think, what it refers to is those cathedrals, which reminds us of a wonderful symbol for the Middle Ages, those great Gothic buildings and other styles of cathedrals that were constructed at that time. And they were constructed not just for a small little group, but for a whole community. And so this is a lovely symbol for a vision for communal living, I think. Architecture is a kind of analogy. I've been thinking about this. I would love to hear y'all's thoughts too. I think we think about culture building. That's something that I've heard lately, especially in Christian circles. How are we building the culture? And so that's a wonderful connection when we're thinking about the architecture of a church, something meant for worship. It's a culturally produced building. So that says something about what the medievals valued. I don't think of a normal Christian medieval family having tons of money, yet they labored and they took the skills and the things that they had to do something like constructing cathedrals that must have taken entire villages and cities generations to do that kind of thing. And most of them are unsigned. I think I was reading about the history of Notre Dame, and someone put the name of the architect on the corner of one of the stones at a far corner of the outskirts of the building, which is rare because most of those things were built when they were unsigned. So I think it's a lovely picture. I've got the old cover, and then oh, you can't see it because my camera can't. Well, the old cover is very different. I'm not going to try anymore. But the new cover is lovely. You can look at it in the bookstore, and it's got the beautiful sketch behind it, architectural sketch, and then this feast before us. And I think that we're going to get a chance to talk a little bit more about that Christian vision of cultural building community living under Christ.
The major theme of the book is just longevity. While you were
Mm-hmm.
talking, I was thinking about, we build a lot of so-called intangibles, the three of us. We've been building families or businesses or um, our churches in the sense of nurturing the people that are in it. And that's, of course, so satisfying. But I can't think of like a big construction project, something tangible that I have spent years and years and years on. And probably the biggest thing that I've spent time on might be typing a paper or a book. And those aren't 20-year projects, at least mine haven't been. And I was thinking about, because I was talking to our producer Emma before this about websites and how like you design them knowing in 3 years they're no good because the technology's changed and that consumer
Mhm.
mindset of having things break, so you have to buy another one. Like the modernity, for as wonderful as technologies have been in healthy living and in providing more food for all kinds of people, hasn't been too good for the soul.
Mhm.
And I think that's what they're addressing.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so much of what we build today is just utilitarian, right? It's to be
Mhm.
used for a little while and then it's to be discarded
Mhm.
because it's lost its usefulness.
Mhm.
But when they built the cathedrals, they did have a very specific use in mind, but it was a use that would never change, that would never go away, right? Worship is what believers are called to in every generation. Um, whereas your VCR is probably long, long destroyed in the dump somewhere. Your DVD
Mhm.
player is probably going that way too, if it hasn't already.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so, um, so, so one of the things I loved about this book is that one of his themes is that we should be unashamed as Christians, that our
Mhm.
culture as informed by Christ and what he has taught us, is different and distinct from the culture around us. That
Mhm.
includes both the popular culture, which is one thing that we talk about quite a bit, especially
Mhm.
as homeschooling parents, Christian homeschooling parents. We want our children to have at root a different culture than the pop culture around us, but also that we have a different culture in the sense that we have a different epistemology, big word, I'll define it for
Mhm.
our listeners, um, a different philosophy of the way that we know what we know. Um,
Mhm.
the modernist view, the modern world around us, emphasizes scientific knowledge as being the sort of one true and verifiable source of truth, right? It's the one way we can know for sure what we know. But Doug Wilson points out that if you look back at the history of science, what you actually find out is that within a generation or two or three, what pretty much everybody has thought was firm and established knowledge is just backward and ignorant in a future generation and
Mhm.
is ridiculed, right? Um, so so how does that worldview, that whole change of mind, not that we discard science, but that we acknowledge that science is only one way that we know things, how does that inform what we do as classical educators?
The thing you made me think about was how a lot of people who aren't maybe say true scientists or earn a living as a scientific expert, when they think about science, they think about facts and charts and memorization and those kind of things that we do a lot of as classical educators. We call them our grammar. They're the beginning.
Mhm.
Um, and then as classicalists, we know we don't want to leave our children there. So we're thrilled to know the language of both history and modern experts and to introduce our children to that. But we want them to also move forward and to start thinking. And what's really interesting is classicalists are so often thought of as stodgy, or, Lewis refers to chronological snobbery. And yet it's truly the classicalists who are trying to say, let's not just move forward with our own knowledge. Let's move forward with all of history's knowledge from as many geographical and cultural areas as we can, sifting through the best of it, so that we are not backwards or ignorant. And so I just find that this whole, it's just such a paradox that people think we're trying to preserve something when really what we're doing is preparing our children for even more.
Mhm. It's true. We are preparing them for more. And I love how we get to study a wide array of subjects using these classical tools. I mean, um, my students have greatly benefited. My children have benefited. I've benefited from reading tons of poetry and tons of great stories, which has informed us and shaped us and given us fat souls,
Mhm.
and studied um, scientific works and scientific ways of knowing things. Especially this year with my Challenge 4 students, we've been thinking about the roots of the scientific revolution and how some of those great men were great Christians who had poetic imaginations, even musical imaginations like Galileo. And some of that is astounding to them because, and it was to me too when I first discovered it too, that they had this wider knowledge base of things to draw upon. They weren't siloed in just scientific fields. They were also studying all kinds of subjects. All of it informed their view of the world and what they were doing. And I think gave them, opened their eyes to be able to look for the patterns of the hand of the maker because they knew he was the artist who designed it all.
Of knowing things for us is that it's limitless. And someone who's a materialist or think only the scientific method's what matters or have to be able to measure it with my senses, otherwise it's not real. They live in a world without windows. And I love that
Mm,
phrase because I want my
mm,
children to live in a world with windows, to know that with their imagination, they can take the best of scientific knowledge and then elevate it beyond the here and now. And that's something you just, you talk about, a lot of people talk about scientific inquiries to help prepare our children for the future. But if they don't have imagination as part of that preparation, they're just stuck in words they don't care about. And trying to help them to know that you're not doing this to pass a test. You're not learning this information. You're learning for someone else's pleasure, to know that you're learning things so that you can echo in celebration the things the Lord has given you. It gives you a totally different philosophy of knowing things.
Yeah, that's good. Having having an appreciation that that knowledge is a gift from God, right? To know things is something that God has given us as a capacity, and that we should we should use it, um, both for our pleasure and for His glory. That's a really good thing. So sort of on that line, Lee, at this point, you spend a fair amount of your year traveling around speaking to homeschooling parents and others about the importance of classical Christian education and about community. Doug Wilson has been doing much the same thing for a long time. Um, he uh, he's gifted to write with a really inspirational style. Though he obviously knows a lot of things, he isn't the sort of expert who delves deep in his books to sort of lay out all of the arguments and all of the details, to prove up his arguments. But instead, he really leans on um, having a very big vision that he wants to share. And often,
mm,
when I've heard you speak, Lee, you do a lot of the same thing rather than trying to dig down and ferret out all the big words or the nuanced ideas in every talk. Um, you want to help people get up out of the weeds and see sort of in the clear air. Maybe a window is a great
Mhm.
illustration for that,
Mhm.
to open the window for people who maybe didn't know it was there, couldn't see it. Why is it so important that we have people who will do that, who aren't necessarily writing, a PhD dissertation or an academic work, but are sharing the vision?
Yeah. So I know for myself, in fact, somebody just asked me yesterday what podcasts I listen to that classical educators would appreciate. And I had to sit there and think all the podcasts I listen to are about money or about technology, right? Because those are things that I don't spend a lot of time with. What I love spending time with is people and with my church and with my family. And as I travel about, whoever is waiting on us. And so I think I've kind of learned this balance that, um, well, actually, it's from homeschooling for so long. I think I figured out how to talk to everybody at a third grade level till I find out what is it they're really curious about or what really inspires them. And then I can pull in these authors like Wilson and Lewis and all the ones that we've had on our podcast for the last 2.5 years. All of their stories have informed me. I don't have an original thought anywhere. And so it's just appreciating the classical conversations of history, which when we named the classical conversations, my mother-in-law named it. We had no idea what we were doing. And it just happened to be the right name because when people connect with one another, when they can touch one another, have a meal together, smell the ocean together, all those things you can't do through this technology. That's when they really can listen to each other and be inspired and feel like just hearts are resonating and that where two or more are gathered, the Lord is there. And so when you have someone like Doug who can just speak through books and his lectures and connect with a whole crowd of people and help them
Mhm.
to see that they're sitting in the middle of a mosh pit of Christians who may be their best friends forever. And doesn't that make you want to know them better? Like reminding us of where we really live and where we're really going is what this book is about, and what I think most of the classical conversation curated curriculum is about. It's very easy to get drowned in the tide of modernity, as T.S. Eliot called it. And we need these voices that just say, huh, have you thought about it a different way? But you can't, like a lot of people call me or ask me to solve problems and conversations and conflicts they're having with folks. And I say to them, how can I possibly know what to say to you when I can't look in their eye and understand their circumstances and know more about them? So you have that timely desire to inspire and help people, but you also need these voices that are timeless. And those are the ones I think we love in classical conversations because then it allows us to go serve. And that's what we want our children seeing us do is serve. So that was a lot of words. I don't know if I answered your question.
That was good. Thanks, Lee. Well, we've come to that point in time when we need to take our little break. So, Lee, would you like to take us to the break?
Yes, yes. So once again, I want to thank classicalconversationsbooks.com, where the books discussed can be purchased. We have the entire 2023, 2024, and now 2025 calendar at leebortons.com, my website, as well as the archived previous podcasts at Lee Bortons at YouTube. So, you know what? I don't know what we're doing for January. You want to give us a clue for what's coming up next, Tim?
Sure, we're going to take a hard turn from what we've been doing for these last several months, and we're going to be starting the new year
Mhm.
with the American language series.
All right, so that's what we'll start with in January. That's really stepping back for us as old as we are. Tim, you're probably closest to having taught somebody phonics, but that's such a great little series with its pictures and simple words, along with some of the other resources that we have. So I'm going to go get that out.
Timely,
Huh?
timely for a new year, right?
Yeah, start right at the beginning.
Good.
Mhm.
All right. Well, normally in our second half, we tend to read some longer passages, try and get some of the big ideas from the resource itself. But with
Mm.
Doug Wilson's writing, often it's better to take small bites and chew them thoroughly rather than to try and eat a whole feast. Um, he tends to jam a lot of big ideas into a few little words. So, um, Brittany, would you read for us this first section where Doug Wilson's highlighting that distinction between the Christian philosophy and the modernist?
Sure. Modernity and its natural child, postmodernity, are pleased with the rejection of truth, beauty, and goodness, the three faces of culture. In their place, they unfold the tired, wrinkled banners of a tedious rationalism and socially just sentimentalism. But the modern void is a vacuum. Real beauty has no place to sit. Darwin has locked the door. Yet moderns don't give up the game. Their prophets stand stage tall, throw out law, yet condemn injustice, trashing simple oaths for new, unridden flesh. Each sharp eyed generation tires of everything except their joy of rebellion, playing it over and over again in an endless roll. Everything's boring except their own eternal rebellion. This is their totally new and different program for the future. This is modernity's barbarism. Hollow hearts led about by sterile matter, perversely mocking those with full lives.
This because my favorite phrase in the whole book's in here. Why did you pick this section for us?
Well, yeah, it really jumped out at me. Partly because, I mean, his beautiful prose, he really picks vibrant and powerful words and does such a nice job of juxtaposing the things that are timeless with things
Mm.
that are merely timely in the modern era.
So, like, they unfold the tired, wrinkled banners, a tedious rationalism. I don't speak that way normally.
I don't think
Me
many of us
either.
do. Yeah, I think one of the things that my wife and I nearly despair over when we talk with a lot of other parents, especially as we approached the teenage years with our children and our peers were arriving there too, um, was this glorification of what was expected of teenagers in the way of rebellion. That there was sort of this, oh well, teenagers are just rebellious. That's what they are. That's what they do. It's what we did when we were that age. And it's like the boys will be boys kind of mentality that yes, there is a grain of truth in it, right? As children grow, they do test boundaries and they do ask hard questions, and sometimes they disagree with you, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily rebelling. We feed that. We feed it into them, and um this section really that idea at the very end, right? That it's everything's boring except for this persistent rebellion. And then we see it all around us in culture. And I think it's just this prolonged teenagehood that we've
Mm.
imposed on ourselves that people can't find rest in things that are old, things that are true, things that have been beautiful forever. We must question and reject and find something new because the old is just not good enough for us.
The
Yeah, and
early
we see
years
the
of
first.
oh, go ahead,
Go
Brittany.
ahead.
Okay, so one time in the early years of classical conversations, um, I was sharing a story with the students about before I became a Christian because I had the misfortune of not knowing Christ. So I was in my mid 20s, and the one of the students just made this comment about how my testimony and my conversion was more believable than her parents because they had been raised as Christians. And my heart just sank. And I
Mm.
thought, we don't even know how to teach our children to love the steadfastness of beauty, that it's way more enticing and interesting to have a testimony where evil turned to good. And it's not that we don't need those stories, but the valuing of the more beautiful story, the perseverance through it all and making righteous choices was being frowned upon by someone in those years that you're talking about. Now, that to me was natural that she was acted that way in one sense because she's trying to figure out for her own self which
Mm.
path am I on, and how am I going to go. So I just thought this passage just just is so clear on talking about how the three phases of our culture aren't
Mhm.
what's in foremost in anybody's mind anymore. It's the rebellion.
I agree. This passage makes me so sad, because it's so empty, but at the same time, it's such a distinct um, vision compared to what this book offers. This book offers is complete the fullness of truth, goodness, and beauty, and you can see that. I mean, we can look around our culture; it's built on such shaky grounds. Nothing lasts. It's not beautiful. We were thinking about architecture earlier, but think of how many ugly buildings we see that are built now.
Especially community buildings. Like the
Yeah.
individuals' homes are beautiful. It's like
Hmm.
reversed. We all have our own cathedrals now instead
That's
of the
true.
community.
There's a good article, Lee. You should write that one.
Oh,
Yeah.
Um,
Yes, do it.
all right. So we talked about it a little bit already in this work. Doug Wilson paints a pretty glorious picture of the Middle Ages and the height to which Christianity had brought society, and this sort of persistent consciousness of the divine. Obviously, the cathedral looming over the landscape, right? The church bell tolling the hours was central to family life, to community life. Um, but he does give us a good warning about romanticizing the Middle Ages, which is I found very refreshing because I was reading it and thinking, yeah, there's a lot of good. There's some bad that came along with it, and so he doesn't give us just rose-tinted glasses. So Lee, will you read us this next paragraph?
Medieval Protestantism is certainly not a longing to live in medieval times and wear their funny hats. It's an attempt to continue their Christian discussion of truth, beauty, and goodness that was cut so short. The medieval period is not the culmination of Christian culture, but it was headed in the right direction. It was telling a wonderful story and headed for great things, triumphing with beauty over its enemies. But it never got to complete the story. Christians need to start thinking more about plotting the rest of that story, preparing for the death of modernity over the next century. It's time to renew our devotion to Christian truth, beauty, and goodness, the good life. But in order to continue that discussion, we need to search out how our medieval forefathers were progressing before they were silenced. We need to learn to scoff at modernity's tired idols and examine the many levels of the medieval Christian vision. From Jeremiah 6:16, ask for the old path. Where is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls.
This little passage reminds me a lot of what C.S. Lewis talks about when it comes to progress and repentance, right? That when the the best way to move forward sometimes is to recognize you've taken a wrong turn and to go back,
Mhm.
right? To repent and then progress backward for a ways before you refine the good path and and continue forward. We, I think we all recognize that we do that at times. Brittany and I, as writers, there are
Mhm.
times when we spend hours or maybe even days pursuing something before we realize, no, you know what, this is not the right thing. We need to go back, right? So
Mhm.
find that thing you saved last week and start over again from there on a firmer footing. Um, and so I appreciated that Doug here isn't saying that they had reached the height, but that they were headed in a good and a proper direction, that we need to refine that footing and then enter into that conversation.
Mm.
About this book is the, the, it probably isn't fair to say, but it feels like, Doug's glorification of Protestantism. And so when I was reading this, and there's some comments about, of course, pagan, secularists, Catholics, various groups of people, where he says negative things. And so I get a little hackled there. And then I stopped myself and I went, wait a minute. 98% of the book is about me not seeing the right way to do things. And just because he's including other folks who maybe haven't thought it through as well, I think it's just important to point out, because then it makes me wonder is, he's focusing on the great things that were occurring thought-wise in medieval Protestantism, but are there other time periods before then that might hold
Mhm.
some really good lessons for us too? So I just wanted our listeners to know that as classicalists, we're looking at all time periods and trying to have a variety of authors' opinions.
Mm. Yeah, that's good. I heard a interview that he did kind of 20 years after the book was published. I think it's been around about 26 years. He said, now if I were to rewrite it, I would include some yeah buts. Yeah, but this and yeah, but that. And he said that, we want to have a historically informed view of Christianity, and we need to recognize and learn from our brothers and sisters, remembering that Pentecost didn't happen in 1517 or 1776, that there were Christians that we can learn from. Augustine is my brother, Boethius is my brother, Jerome is my brother, like these that went all the way back to the early church, and learn from them. And so I think he does a good job bringing in some voices to in the book that have helped me go, oh, I want to learn more about that. I'd like to read some more of what they had written and said.
Yeah. So our next passage is he sort of casts an even wider net in a sense. He
Mm.
our students read Beowulf in our curriculum and challenge 2 for classical conversations, um and Wilson gives us a really good example right out of that ancient anonymous story, right? Early Christian epic, English epic, where paganism and Christianity are just sort of meeting for the first time in this ancient story. Um, but it still has things in that are there that reflect some of God's truths for us. So, Brittany, will you read a little bit for us from
Sure.
this section?
Yeah. Before fighting Grendel, Beowulf declares that the results are in the hands of witted God, that is, wise God. God's understanding, his wisdom, is infinite. We cannot see to the beginning of the end of it. We cannot define this infinitude by looking at a clear night sky, but we may, in this analogical manner, get some sense of it. What does God not know? He is the only wise God. Hrothgar, the Danish king, also speaks of Wittig Dryden, the wise Lord. He is the only wise Lord. What is this wisdom? Who is this wisdom? Beowulf also acknowledges that the wise God is Halig Dryden, the holy Lord. Our idea of holiness is greatly truncated today. We limit it in thousands of scrupling and schoolmarmish ways. We've lost any understanding of the numinous. We do not know what it would be like to walk through a grove of ancient trees sacred to the holy and terrible gods, and then be converted to the worship of one holier and stranger and mightier than these. We reject the shining of the ancient and numinous gods, not because we repudiate those gods as every Christian must, but because we've rejected the very idea of the numinous. We reject them not because they are creatures, but because they remind us of the divine. This is not the holiness of Christianity, but rather the crass materialism of that great loser, modernity, and its ugly little sister, postmodernity.
He pulls no punches.
No, I looked up that word numinous. It's not one we always hear. It means supernatural, mysterious, filled with
Yeah.
the presence of God, or the holy.
Same argument that Tolkien and Lewis did, that oftentimes pagans are closer to knowing the truth about God because they believe he's in all of creation than an
Mm.
atheist who just believes in what comes out of a laboratory or what their senses can touch.
Yeah, that's true. I was thinking of C.S. Lewis talking about um, walking out under a night sky. I think it was
Mm.
discarded image. He mentions it, and he said that if he would like his students to walk out under a night sky and view the heavens as the medievals had, that they might see the night sky and believe that an artist had made that, and that there were ranks upon
Mm.
ranks of ordered creation, that the sky wasn't empty like Star Trek might have us believe. I love Star Trek, but it is about cold space, right? Kind of like Ransom's
Mhm.
experience in Out of the Silent Planet, like our students read, where he expects the space that he's traveling through, or the heavens that he's traveling through, to be this cold, empty space, and yet he finds it's packed with light and life and created beings. And what if we could look up at the sky and see the great dance of the planets and the stars, and to think about the Lord ordering those and the rank upon ranks of angels and other created beings that he's made, instead of viewing it, as I often do, as thinking about it scientifically only, um, having that way of medieval synthesis, or harmony, where they tried to take all the things that they knew about the whole world and the cosmos and unite it under this one understandable, harmonious thing.
Yeah. I think the stripping away of wonder, right? It's one of
Yeah.
the great symptoms, or maybe even causes of modernity and postmodernity, right? That we take away that marveling at things that are beyond our comprehension and maybe even our ability to comprehend. uh, when we when we think that we can figure everything out by calculation or observation or dissection, nothing is wonderful anymore. It's all just facts yet to be discovered, which is not very exciting. Um, so uh, I think that's why he gets around to that sort of crass materialism.
Mm-hmm.
That it's low. It's low. There's nothing high and wonderful and holy about it.
Say this is fair, that materialism would be saying, yeah, they're just stars, and for the materialism of modernity, but the ugly little sister post-modernity would say, what stars? Because they haven't even looked at them.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that one of the great Disney examples, Disney doesn't give us a lot of great things, but one of them there with it is in The Lion King when Simba is looking up and talking about how the stars are the souls of his ancestors, and Pumbaa says, "Oh, I always thought they were just giant flaming balls of gas." Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of is it? I mean, scientifically, we know that stars are basically that, right? They're plasma,
Mm-hmm.
burning plasma in space. But there's something about them too that we know that is more, more wonderful and marvelous than something that can just be quantified as something of a certain chemical makeup at a certain temperature, some distance away from Earth.
Because even the greatest materialist, Big Banger, doesn't believe in God and divinity with the stars at all, still looks at them and sees things that are magical. And they even apply magical kind of math to it, whether they know it or not, in their attempts to describe them. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like God's truth, it just permeates no matter how hard you try to reject it.
Yeah. Yeah. So our last reading I'm going to read for us
Mhm.
sort of, I think, brings it home. What we were just talking about that's really good in this grand scheme of things, and in our conceptions of God and the cosmos. Um, I love it that Wilson doesn't leave us only there with these ancient,
Mm-hmm.
right? These people hundreds of years ago, things bigger than we are that we maybe have never seen, but he brings it home for us into everyday life. This is from a little section called Swords into Plowshares. Creativity makes part of the difference between laboring and mere gathering. We are made in the image of God, and we reflect perhaps most clearly in our creativity. At creation, God was pleased with the creativity he brought into completion. Industrial labor often severs us from the completed work of our hands. We don't oversee the project from beginning to end. Most tend to know only parts. Again, that's not sinful at all, but it has to be less satisfying to never be able to mold something from beginning to end. That's why moderns have to have hobbies. They can't find satisfaction in their money earning work, so many seek creative satisfaction in model planes and trains. Compare industrial tediousness, though, with gardening and cooking. These activities, when done with even minimal love, allow a person to create from beginning to end. The gardener or farmer enlivens soil, plants a crop, battles weeds, submits to weather, tends to growth, and finally harvests a miracle. Of course, this sort of overseeing productivity can and does happen in the city, but it's not common in big industry. Bakers, woodcrafters, and plumbers can know it, but few industrial occupations do. And yet the middleman and salesman will always be with us, and still he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This I also saw, that it was from the hand of God. Ecclesiastes 2:24. But this takes concerted effort. Tedious assembly line work encourages bitterness. Being a part of a corporate effort in satisfying unfaced masses can't help to begin to feel petty and insignificant in a way that midwifing carrots, corn, and tomatoes into the world never does.
A place where I wonder if he would disagree with himself, because I disagree with him. I think both the farmer and the industrialist can glory in what's going to happen from their products. I mean, how is being maybe the one that puts the screw into from the head of the shovel to to the stick any different than the guy that only laid some of the bricks of the cathedral, yet never saw the beginning or the end? I think it's your attitude about what you're doing. And I think a really good example for people who maybe aren't sure what I'm saying is to read I Pencil, which our students read in Challenge 1, about how there's not one single person on the face of this earth that knows how to make a pencil. Every part of it, of its creation, requires thousands of people you've never met. And there's a gloriousness to that.
Mm.
It's good. He did say, one of the things he said was he would emphasize more the good of the city, because he said, well, the life in the Bible begins in a garden and ends in a garden city. And he does talk about that, because I think what he's talking about is the goodness of communal living. And that can be done in a city, as we find in the end of, in Revelations, the end. I agree. All kinds of creative efforts viewed, I mean, even as a mom, like changing diapers, this book was inspiring to me because it reminded me of that little work, that repetitive work that doesn't ever finish really until the child's finished with diapers, can be done to the glory of God with joy and thanks.
Yeah. I think that that's the key there. And he does sort of add that in. There's a sprinkle of it in the middle of this passage where he says these activities, when done with even minimal love, right? It's a love of the thing you're doing, the love of the people you're serving, and most importantly, I think a love of the thing that God has given you to do, whatever that thing is. And we're very thankful at Brittany and I to be working with Classical Conversations Multimedia, where we do get to make beautiful things that go out into the world to serve God and his people. And thankful to do it alongside you, Lee.
Yes.
Oh, it's just so great. And I believe with so many other folks who've told me this, that your efforts are going to save Western civilization. Whatever that means, I don't know that I know, but it definitely has something to do with the medieval vision for truth, goodness, and beauty. So thanks, team, for being here today, and carry on.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas.